Many anime fans would agree that in terms of new gen villains, Sukuna is easily near the top of that list, if not at the very top in terms of impact. Throughout his time in Jujutsu Kaisen, he's mentally tortured Yuji way past the point that would break any normal person, and he's killed more people than you can count on both hands. However, just how long would Sukuna go to jail if he were made to stand trial? Join me in today's newest video on Anime Explained, and the first of a new series on the channel, the Anime True Crime series, where we take a look at all the crimes carried out by your favorite anime characters, from villains to heroes, and in some cases the heroes themselves, to determine what their prison sentence would be if they went to jail. Feel free to leave your suggestion for the next character that I cover, and if you want to see me do the same thing for Naruto characters, you'll want to subscribe to my Naruto Explained channel. For this video, we'll obviously be using the Japanese legal system to determine the sentences, which you should find interesting given that Japanese laws are different than the US. And obviously, since Sukuna would get the death penalty multiple times over, for every life imprisonment and for every death penalty, we're just going to assign him the average number of years that a Japanese male lives, which is going to be 81 years. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at how long Sukuna would go to jail by looking at all of his crimes starting from the moment he debuted in chapter 1 of the story, which obviously we will not be using Heian era Sukuna, since so much of what happened was not shown in the manga. So when Sukuna took over Yuji's body in volume 1 of the manga, he started racking up the first of many charges by doing the following: taking over Yuji's body, attempting to murder Satoru Gojo, and the property damage for destroying the high school rooftop. If we were to apply the Japanese legal system to Sukuna's actions, his crimes would likely fall under several serious offenses, leading to a long prison sentence or the death penalty, which we're going to ignore the death penalty. First up, we have the unlawful possession and the control of a person's body, this being Yuji Itadori. In real-world terms, this could be considered forcible confinement or even bodily harms, since Yuji did suffer physical consequences from Sukuna's possession. This could lead up to 10 years in prison. You also have the attempted assault and attempted murder of Satoru Gojo. Sukuna attempted to attack Gojo when he took over Yuji's body. In Japanese law, attempted assault is punishable under general assault laws. If intent to kill can be proven, it could escalate to attempted murder, which carries a sentence of 15 years up to life in prison. If it is only classified as assault, then it would be a maximum of 2 years in prison, but attempted murder is again 15 years. Also, the property damage by destroying the high school rooftop, this will fall under the property destruction law. The penalty is up to 3 years in prison or a fine of 300,000 yen. In volume 2 of the manga at the detention center, he added even more to his crimes. He has a second charge of unlawful possession and control of Yuji Itadori's body. This is again forcible confinement and bodily harm. Since Sukuna has possessed Yuji twice, this would count as 2 separate offenses. So this would be up to 10 years per offense for a total of 20 years. Then you have the partial destruction of the detention center itself. This would be property destruction up to 3 years in prison and a fine of up to 300,000 yen. If the destruction caused harm to civilians or law enforcement, this could escalate to arson or damage to public property, which would carry much harsher penalties. Then you have the death of the finger bearer cursed spirit. Even though it's a cursed spirit, we're going to treat this like it's a murder. So killing a cursed spirit wouldn't be punishable under human law unless it is considered to be a protected entity, which that's what we're going to do. So this would be a life in prison. Then when you get to ripping out Yuji Itadori's heart while possessing him, this would be attempted murder. Since Yuji technically died but was revived, this would be classified as attempted murder, which is 15 years up to life in prison. It can also be classified as bodily harm with the intent to kill, which would add another 10 years to his sentence. Then you have the attempted murder of Megumi Fushiguro. So this would be attempted murder, which is 15 years up to life in prison. Since Sukuna had clear intent to kill Fushiguro, this would likely increase his overall prison sentence. Then you have the property damage to the surrounding buildings when he fought against Fushiguro. This would be another 3 years in prison and a fine. If significant enough, this could be escalated to destruction of public infrastructure, which would carry an even harsher penalty. Then you have the murder of Yuji Itadori. While this was a spiritual battle, Yuji did get his head cut off here, and he does revive in real life. So this would count as murder. Even though Yuji came back to life, Sukuna technically killed him, which under Japanese law would not be excused. This would be a minimum of 15 years in prison or the death penalty or life in prison. In volume 3 of the manga, during the battle against Mahito at the high school, Sukuna carried out even more crimes. Though these crimes are in the legal gray area, since some of them could be argued as self-defense. So you have the verbal threat to Mahito with the implied threat of harm. This would fall under the crime of criminal intent. Under Japanese law, issuing a threat that could cause fear of harm is considered a crime. Even though Sukuna did not outright state he would harm Mahito, his tone, his wording, it clearly implied retaliation if Mahito touched his soul again. This would be a fine of 500,000 yen as well as 2 years in prison. Then you have slicing Mahito's body but not killing him and slicing him twice. This would be aggravated assault and bodily harm. Since Mahito survived the attack, this would fall under assault or grievous bodily harm rather than attempted murder. If this was ruled as an attempted murder, Sukuna could receive 15 years to life in prison. However, since this would be bodily harm, this would be up to 15 years in prison, which is a rather long sentence there. Then when you get into volume 13 and 14 during the Shibuya incident arc, Sukuna really goes on a crime spree. He has another possession of Yuji's body. This is forcible confinement. This is the third time that Sukuna has taken over Yuji's body, and it will be treated as another count of the same offense, which would be 10 years for a total of 30 years for the cumulative prior possessions. Then you get to the cutting off the top of Jogo's head but not killing him. This will be assault and bodily harm. Since Jogo survived this attack, it counts as a grievous bodily harm rather than attempted murder. This will be up to 15 years in jail. Then you get the murder of the 2 high school girls who were serving Suguro Ghetto when he beheaded them. This would be murder. And since murder carries a minimum of 5 years per murder, up to life in jail or the death penalty, the total would be anywhere from 10 years up to life in prison. Then you have the murder of Jogo. So this would be still classified as murder because we're going to consider Jogo a human being for the purposes of this video. This could be anywhere from 5 years to life in prison. Then you get to the damage of the Shibuya train station. The crime in question is going to be property damage. If considered damage to public infrastructure, the penalties can be harsher. This starts out at 3 years. Then you get destroying multiple buildings with city block-wide level damage. This would be wide-scale property damage, and it will also fall under an act of terrorism. This would be 5 years per building. With a city block being destroyed, this would escalate into an act of domestic terrorism, which carries a life sentence in Japan. Then you have threatening to kill 2 jujutsu sorcerers if they move, Panda and Kusakabe basically. This would be a criminal threat and up to 2 years in prison. Then you have the assault on Maharaga. Since Maharaga is not considered to be a human being, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to consider this assault, and that will be 15 years. Then you have the damaging of multiple buildings in Shibuya and the use of a 200-meter radius of the attack when he uses domain expansion. This would be large-scale property damage and up to 10 years in prison with additional years due to property charges. Then you have the killing of thousands of people in the Shibuya district. We don't have an approximate number, but given how populated Shibuya is, 1,000 or several thousands is likely. This would be mass murder or genocide. This would be the automatic death penalty under Japanese law. This alone guarantees execution if he was judged by a human law. Then you get to the killing of Haruta. This would be murder, which would be 5 years up to life in prison. Then you get to torturing Yuji Itadori by forcing him to relive the massacre. This would be the crime of psychological torture. While Japan doesn't have a law specifically addressing psychological torture, it could be prosecuted under causing psychological distress. The penalty would be 3 years in prison or additional charges under other violent crimes that you could stack this with. During the early portion of the Culling game arc, Sukuna wasn't as active, but boy did he carry out a number of crimes. He possessed Yuji Itadori's body again for a 4th time. This would be forcible confinement and assault. Since this is now the 4th occurrence, it would be aggravated repeat assault under Japanese law. This would be an additional 10 years for 40 years in the form of cumulative prior possession. Then you have the attempted killing of Angel. The attempted murder of Angel, since Angel did survive, it still falls under this attempted murder charge instead of a homicide. This could be anywhere from 15 years to life in prison. Then you have the possession of Megumi Fushiguro's body. This is another charge of forcible confinement, unlawful possession of a body. This mirrors the possession of Yuji, but Megumi's possession is arguably worse because Sukuna went on to commit other crimes like trying to bathe his soul afterwards. This is anywhere from 10 years to 15 years, potentially a life sentence given this is a repeat offense. Then you have the assault of Yuji Itadori without killing him. This would be assault and bodily harm. Even though this did not rise to the level of murder, this would be 15 years. Then you have damaging multiple buildings during this fight. This would count as property destruction, which could be up to 10 years in prison given the amount of damage done. Then you have slicing Yuji's body multiple times in a second assault. This would be aggravated assault, and since this caused severe bodily harm but not fatal, it falls under the same penalty as the prior attack. So now you add another 15 years to everything else he's done. Then you have the additional attempted killing of Yuji, which is another 15 years to life in prison. Then you also have the attempted murder of Maki Zenin, which is another 15 years to life in prison. After taking over Megumi's body, Sukuna goes even further over the edge once he starts the soul bathing ritual to submerge Megumi's soul. The soul bathing ritual basically counts as a forcible submerger of Megumi's soul in despair. This would fall under the psychological torture and aggravated psychological harm crimes. While Japan does not have a law for soul destruction per se, this would be classified as mental abuse, coercion, and psychological torture with permanent harm to Megumi. This would be 15 years to life imprisonment. Then you have the killing of Ryu by slicing his head off by 3 different parts. This would count as murder. This is a direct execution style killing, and it counts as first-degree murder. This would be the death penalty or life in prison. Then you have property damage while fighting against Yorozu. This would be property damage given the large scale. This would count as severe urban destruction and public endangerment, and it borders on terrorism charges. So the penalty here without terrorism could be up to 10 years in prison. Then you have the killing of Yorozu, and by extension Sumiki Fushiguro. By killing Yorozu, that would be a murder, but because Sumiki was a possession victim, it would also be classified as a second-degree murder or a negligent homicide. This is obviously life in prison or the death penalty. Then you have the assault on Satoru Gojo after Gojo got unsealed. This would be aggravated assault and criminal threats. Since Sukuna threatened to kill Gojo but did not attempt it, this would not qualify as attempted murder. Instead, it will fall under the violent assault with the intent to harm and issuing a criminal threat, which is up to 15 years in prison. Now, during the final arc of the story, the Shinjuku showdown arc, Sukuna really cuts loose. Sukuna is at his most lethal he's ever been. He damages multiple buildings when fighting against Gojo. This crime would be large-scale property damage. Given the scale of destruction, this would be classified as reckless destruction of public property and private property and public endangerment, even though people weren't there. This would be a penalty of 15 years. Then you have the killing of Satoru Gojo by cutting him in half. This is first-degree premeditated murder, since Gojo was killed intentionally and in a cruel way. This would give him the death penalty. Then by killing Kashimo by slicing him into pieces, this is another first-degree murder. Given the gruesome nature of this death, this would count as extreme aggravated murder. This would obviously be the death penalty. Then you have the attempted murder of Higuruma. Since Higuruma did survive, this qualifies as attempted murder rather than assault, which that starts out at 15 years. Then you have the attempted murder of Yuji Itadori once again. And since this is him attempting to repeatedly kill Yuji, this would count for life in prison. Then you have him accepting Kenjaku's offer to activate the Tengen merger, which could destroy a country with a cursed spirit being released. The conspiracy to commit mass murder and terrorism. Since the merger was not carried out, it remains a conspiracy to commit mass murder. But Sukuna had clear intent to kill thousands of people, potentially millions. This would be life imprisonment or the death penalty. Then you have the attempted murder of Yuta Okotsu, the first attack. This would be 15 years. Then you have another attempted murder of Maki Zenin, which would be another 15 years. Then you have the attempted murder of Kusekabe, which is another 15 years. Then you have the attempted murder of Miguel, which is 15 years. And then you have the attempted murder of LaRue, which is 15 years. Then you have the attempted murder of Nanami student Ino, which is 15 years. Then you have the murder of Choso, which is the death penalty. Then you have the attempted murder of Aoi Todo, which is another 15 years. Then you have another attempted murder of Yuta Okotsu, which is 15 years. Now, since we've gone through every single one of the charges carried out in the manga, assuming there's no death penalty and each death is 81 years in jail, and assuming Japanese law under these circumstances allows us to stack multiple life sentences together. Based on these charges, how many years in jail would Sukuna get? So if you add up all these charges, which are 5 death penalties, Gojo, Kashimo, Choso, Ryu, Jogo, that's 405 years, because that'd be 81 times 5. Then you have the attempted murders. Higuruma, Yuji, multiple times. Yuta, multiple times. Maki, multiple times. Kusekabe, Miguel, LaRue, Ino, Todo. That's 192 years. 192.5 to be precise. Then you have 3 charges of large-scale property damage. The Detention Center, Shibuya, and Shinjuku. That's 37.5 years. You have the psychological trauma of Yuji. That's 10 years. Threats to mahito and jujutsu sorcerers. That's 5 years. Sukuna would receive a minimum of 650 years in prison under the Japanese legal system, accounting for his multiple death penalties, attempted murder, large-scale property damage, psychological trauma, criminal threats, and this is merely assuming he's only charged with 1 death penalty for each mass killing that he carried out. And the total fines for this would be as follows. Property damage, 37.5 billion yen, which is $250 million. Murder compensation, which is 100.4 billion, which is 662 million US dollars. Attempted murder compensation, which is 500 million yen, which is $3.3 million. Criminal threat fines would be 20 million yen, which is 132,000 US dollars. Psychological torture fine would be 50 million yen, which is 330,000 US dollars, for a grand total of 138.47 billion yen, which is going to be $916.3 million in US dollars. Now, since it's never stated how many people died in events like Shibuya, we can't say with certainty what the life sentence would be for each person killed. But if we use a baseline that he killed 1,000 people, it would be as follows. Again, adding a life sentence basically being 81 years in jail, a death sentence being 81 years in jail. 1,000 victims would be 81,000 years. 5,000 victims would be 405,000 years. 10,000 victims would be 810,000 years. In short, Sukuna would serve on the low end 650 years in jail and up to 810,650 years in jail. And if we assume that he killed 10,000 victims in the modern day, again, because the actual victim number is never stated, it will be a total of 600 billion yen, which would be the equivalent of 4 billion US dollars in fines. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the Anime True Crime series. Feel free to leave your suggestions for other characters in the future, and if I like them enough, I'll turn it into a video. In the meantime, consider subscribing and checking out more videos from Anime Explained.